why don't we get started? And I get to do these headphones and see if I can get comfortable. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Mark Lovik. Okay. I want to make this informal today. And one of the things that's happening is with our audience, most of you have either dabbled in WPF or Silverlight, but you haven't done a lot of it. And what I'm really trying to do is going to be two things. I'm going to give you a little bit of a code base to work with because break-in is one of those stinker things you have to worry about. And I want to talk about the concepts that cause troubles. Because right now, if you understand the concepts and if you can get break-in and code at different levels, that's going to be your major set of impediments to be able to progress right now in Silverlight. And once you start doing things, you'd have specific questions. So today I'm going to try and give you a whirlwind tour, and I'm going to try and make it small enough that it's going to be digestible and easy enough, but I'd rather have a discussion. So interrupt me, please, and let's just see what we can do. Okay, Silverlight and RIA services. To get started, Silverlight's a browser plugin. It's like Flash. So think about this. You got a browser. We shove something down from a server as our runtime. It's a subset of a net runtime. And then everything is going to be run off the client. So Silverlight is client only. There is no code on the server. It's just being shoved down to the client. And as a browser, we want to have security. So there's a lot of custom controls and tools. You get all the same richness and designer richness you're used to using with WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation. And it gives you this application kind of environment if you use it in the appropriate way. The only thing is Silverlight by itself doesn't do much of anything. You have to do a lot of work to get out of browser. You have to do a lot of work to get to devices. And most of the time you're going to get your context from the server. So one of the things Microsoft has done is they've tried to ease the development, and they have these monster code wizards, and they're calling it RIA services. So the rich internet application, this is Microsoft's implementation, is basically how do we hook a database up to Silverlight? Okay, that's our RIA services here. And so it's a rich internet application set of services, and it's ASP.NET hosted. Okay, so now as soon as you add these services, you're going to have netcode on the server. So as soon as you start doing it, Silverlight can be done on Linux. You just take it, you deploy it, you shove it down to the client, whether it's an Apache server on Linux or something, or it's on IIS, doesn't make a difference. As soon as you start doing the services, though, you're now becoming a little bit more Microsoft specific. The WCF service then is going to be your traditional communication mechanism. So we're going to be using the WCF pipe to talk between Silverlight and the server. And the whole idea with these RIA services is to make it very easy to set up common data tasks. So we can set it up very, very fast, run these scripts, and hopefully get up and started so you can have a database application up and running without spending 3 months. Maybe. So the outline of what I want to talk today, the biggest part is going to be the Silverlight overview. I'm just going to do very quickly the pieces and parts in Silverlight. Just with basic Silverlight, generic Silverlight does a page and that's about it. One of the things that Microsoft has done is they have something called the Silverlight Navigation app. Now there's two different ways to do things. The navigation app does not navigate. You do not go from page to page to page. Basically, it's you got a window and you shove different content in. It's a view injection, but it looks like you're doing page navigation. Other ways of doing this would be Prism. So in sports, we're used to the idea of Prism, where what it is you can set up these regions and you put content in these regions in some sort of decoupled way. The Silverlight Navigation app tries to look like a normal web navigation application, but it's really doing view injection in a single page environment. And so for the big picture, really is when we start adding this Silverlight 4 and these rich internet kind of things so we can get the database, that's the minimum level to really start doing something of use. If you want an application that really starts storing data, manipulates data, gives something to a customer, you're probably going to have some sort of wire up of this form, and that's going to expect then the RIA services. So I'm going to spend a lot more time on the Silverlight and the perspective, but when we get to the RIA services, hopefully it won't be a conceptual moment. And so if this doesn't make sense, let's talk about it. Well, the approach for today then, I hate canned examples. Like if you ever read the Deitel and Deitel books, they have example after example after example. And if you want to have code examples to get running fast, or if you want to you got a specific problem, you want to hammer something out and don't think about it, those books are great. But if you want to understand a new topic, you're in trouble because they don't tell you much. It's just shovelware. I hate shovelware from a standpoint of learning because you're spending all this time and all these details trying to figure out what in heck you're trying to learn for your mindset so you can, piece this together yourself. Or people will talk at such a high level that you go, darn, I can't map this to real code. So if we've done things right today, I'm going to try and give you scaled examples to get started and try and give you a little bit of a context of what's happening, how to think, what to think about. And I'm going to spend more time on that because if you do this and then grab a Silverlight book and you say, oh, this isn't too tough, or take some examples and break into those, you can get up and running in Silverlight fairly quickly. And the concepts here are going to be the real key. So this way I can avoid that blind magical code. Because whenever I program in blind magical code, I get burned. One place I got burned, for example, is, remember I told you there's no navigation? We were trying to get around Christmas to navigate between pages in Silverlight using this navigation framework, and it doesn't navigate. It was a conceptual underpinning that I had to sort out. When I looked, I said, this is elegant, this is cool. It's not navigation. So the word was killing me, and it was hurting everybody because conceptually we were thinking of things wrong. Okay, not on today's agenda. Expression blend. Matt, that would be perfect for like you or Keith to do or something. And that's a whole new topic. I'm going to do things from Visual Studio. 2008 didn't do a very good job with the graphical builders. 2010 is actually not too bad. And for doing generic kind of work without the very elegant design experience, it's now a usable tool, where 2008 was barely usable, 2005 was not. Except for just a little bit of teasing on it, binding can be a whole huge set of topics. And one of the advantages here is you spend a lot of time not writing code procedurally. We're doing things declaratively. Okay, we're doing things in XAML. And XAML is just, a style of XML, and it's used to build objects. So whenever you see XAML, you think, I'm building something. I'm building a superstructure for something. I'm building a hierarchy for something. I'm shoving everything together. That means that Silverlight and WPF are compositional. We're just taking stuff and shoving it in, taking stuff and shoving it in. And that compositional approach really uses design patterns. And so all these great things in computer science, this really is elegant beyond belief. But if you don't fit it, it's going to hurt you. Okay, the ASP.NET Silverlight interaction interface. There's some cool things you can do. Like, for example, you can take JavaScript and kind of bridge between Silverlight and ASP.NET. And you can actually call net methods in JavaScript, and you can call JavaScript methods in Silverlight, actually. And you can use that as a bridge between the two levels. And really what's happening, think Silverlight right now is using the general gets and posts, and you're just squirting data back and forth between the client and server. But you actually have a rich client runtime that gets you a lot more advantage. So think of this as like a JavaScript where instead of deploying a small interpreter, you now have a much larger, richer system. Security and authentication is a real bugaboo. I'm avoiding that mostly just because that's a whole topic, and usually you just want things to work first from a developer standpoint. When you start getting things to work, you got to lock it down. It's still an important consideration, and what I'm going to do is maybe show you a Silverlight-centric kind of approach. You can do security, from an ASP.NET standpoint using the standard web mechanisms, using cookies and things and session stuff. But Silverlight, in the idea of like a model or a view model, we can hold our session state and do our authentication. We only allow the data to come in once they've authenticated in the first place. So we can actually do persistence and authentication and some of our security actually within Silverlight itself. Okay, I think a bridged approach is best, but this is simpler to start. So those are things I don't want to talk about today. Okay, so to get started with Silverlight, what do? Well, first we better have a perspective. Already I've talked about the idea of a server and the idea of the Silverlight client. So if we think about this idea in the two perspectives, on the server we have an app environment. When you want to get a hold of something, you grab it and you say, I want to go to this path. You can use a URL. You often want to have a service reference. Why? You can encapsulate your database or encapsulate that piece that you want to hide and encapsulate. But you can get a hold of files, directories, configuration files, whatever you want to on the server. So the ASP.NET side, if you're doing it, or the JavaScript side, or your context, has an app environment that's on the server. Okay, on the Silverlight side, we're running in a sandbox. Okay, it's a protected, isolated sandbox for security. But the other thing is, everything we're going to do, if we want to get a hold of a resource that's on the server, it's going to have to do it through a URL, right? We're just going to have to get the reference based on our server addresses. So this is a local server environment. You know, we're getting a hold of everything that the server has accessible for it. The thing that really bothered me at first was if you start doing the ASP.NET stuff, how do you debug it? And I still don't know a good thing about it, but think about this is if you start compiling the resources on the server, when's it happening? Well, before your app gets a hold of it. You know, it's not dynamic with the app, it's done on the server side, and it's often pre-compiled and ready to go. You know, there's some issues in caching. So you gotta think a different way if you want to debug these systems, because if your service built up and it didn't work, you're probably going to have some sort of system login to get a handle on it. And if you don't have that kind of handle, debugging's a stinker. Okay, this is server processing only. And there is never running Silverlight code on the server. So that means Silverlight only app could be any place, as long as you can download the Silverlight runtime, you know, to the client and just throw the XBAP file. It's just dumping a file down. Okay, now once you get on Silverlight, again, there's the sandbox, and that's to protect you. And you want to avoid cross-site scripting, right? Because security nightmares. And so often security is going to be locked down in general, and then development environment, you're going to want to break it open to get it working the first time. It's a whole lot easier once it's working to lock things down successively, I can say that, than it is to try and break in and find that magic combination that works. So one of the tricks that's going to happen is how you set up your server environment can make a big difference in terms of can you get it up and running and developing. But you need to think about security and realize that most of the time you're going to want to keep it in a fairly tight environment. Clients packaged in a ZAP file is a zip file with a manifest. And if you have something like 7-zip, you right-click on it and you just look at the file like any standard zip file. And it's very, very easy to use. And if you don't have 7-zip, get it, just because it's so much easier than using Microsoft and renaming the ZAP file. But it's just a standard zip package that gets thrown from the server to the client, gets set up in the runtime, and you go and execute it. So the server's access is a URL. If you want to open a configuration file, you're going to the server as a URL. You're going to have the security set up so you can read that text file or something, or configuration file. It's got to have security set up so it's accessible as a web-hosted available service. You're going to have very restricted local machine access unless you have things in out of browser mode, which is getting to be supported, and it looks like Silverlight will expand, but its current core use right now is still as a browser app. So think of this as we're running NetLite or MiniNet. I keep thinking of Austin Powers, right? This is MiniNet, not Mini-Me. Okay, so it has most of the net runtime, but it's much, much smaller. The thing that's happening is Silverlight, as we've gone to different versions, Silverlight 4 is a much richer set than you had in Silverlights 2 and 3, and it's getting closer to the desktop environment for WPF. Okay, the runtime process then is in the server. You're going to have a container page, ASPX, HTML, something like that. Inside there, there's going to be, just like Flash, there's going to be some sort of definition say you got a Silverlight thing. You also will have some JavaScript stuff. There's a bunch of JavaScript to set up the communication and some methods. And you have the Silverlight download. Now that's usually done independently. It's done once on a client machine. And normally what happens is if you don't have the download, you can't see the page. So you normally have a little clickable thing that allows you to install Silverlight. And once it's installed on your client machine, now what you're really doing is JavaScript talks to the Silverlight interface, and you download your client app as a ZAP file, this compressed zip file. And that's usually where all your resources are. They're always going to be in some sort of compressed large composite object as opposed to little pieces that are getting thrown across. And if you want to segment this, you've got to have some sort of mechanism to do it. I'm not going to talk about it today, but all that stuff with like managed extension framework like MEF, the great thing about that is that's a way to compartmentalize things so you can download a smaller subset app for a quicker experience for a first time. And then if you need extended things, you can then download those as extended modules in their own compressed files. Okay, so once you've downloaded everything, the client browser loads and runs Silverlight, and so the browser's running the actual Silverlight code itself, and then it's going to unpack and load the client ZAP file. It's got a startup page and some startup things you're going to do, and it starts running the client code, and it's using, and this is important, the best way to program in Silverlight is a single page pattern. And you're going, what do you mean? Well, we don't want to have different addresses with different pieces of code, because every time you're doing it, you start this whole process over. And then the thing is, you can't share context in Silverlight. Remember I said that we could do some of our authentication, we can do some of our protection within Silverlight, but if we have separate page and separate page, there's no real connection mechanism unless we have, let's say, history where we're passing a huge amount of context, let's say as a monster navigation string. That's supported in Silverlight, but okay, rather not do that. So the normal habit is we load a page with Silverlight, and anything we do is within that single page. So you don't have flashing and goofy things. It looks like an application experience. Okay, I'm going to start with a Silverlight Hello World, and this is just talking to you about the project layout and very simple things. Okay, this is one of those, it's pretty much the wizard and looking some parts of it. Okay, so if we're to do it just really fast, you go create a new project, you go in here and you can select Silverlight, and there's a Silverlight application, you click it. That's the boneheaded one that just gives you a minimal open window with nothing on it, and you go, wow, this is Silverlight. But it's a place to get started, and if you want to look at the code, it's the first place you really ought to look at the code and see what's going on. Okay. One of the things it'll do right away is hosting. It's possible to test and play around with Silverlight just by itself and just do a little mock host, but you're not going to do very much. Most of the time you really want to have a web page, and the web page in Silverlight communication is the part that becomes richer and is where the interest is. So you can use the wizard, set up that page, and then we get a startup screen. Okay, why don't we now, I'm going to flip, and I could show you the code. Well, I can show you the code now first a little bit. One of the things that's going to be different for some of you is that we don't just program in language. If you're in Visual Basic, which I don't think as many of you are doing, I use C#, and this is very much C# centric. Part of our programming is in C#, but a lot of it doesn't ever use C# at all. We're doing it in SAML. And again, like I started saying earlier, we have partial classes. Part of it's going to be in code, C#. We're going to tend to minimize that. The other part is going to be in XAML, and this is a way to build objects. And we're doing this by reflection. And I'm going to show you a couple of teases on some of the power of this reflection, on what we can do and some of the wonderful things you can do with this. If you've heard the things like on what Ruby on Rails can do in terms of duck typing, looks like a duck, acts like a duck, is a duck. What it means is you can do crazy typing things. Like, for example, if you have a battleship that has a color property that's gray, and if you have duct tape that has a color that is gray, and you've got a thing that's called color, and it has the same kind of color things, you can now take battleships and duct tape and match them up and polymorphically call the method to see what the color is of these objects. That's duck typing. They're not related. They don't have an inheritance hierarchy. They just have a common method. Okay, we can start doing that very powerful thing, and that's something that's depended on, and it's a key idea here in this XAML, because we're going to be doing something with binding, and this is binding with a vengeance, and we're not going deep into it, but there's a lot of power. So think this is declaring an object, so we can build an object. On the top, we have a user control. Okay, and this user control is the thing that's our main host page for Silverlight. You know, it's just a class. That's a class that's going to display something. It's a container. And we're calling this Silverlight Hello main page. So this is my namespace, this is my class, and my namespace is the same as the name of my project. It's just what the wizards do. Okay, so that's just a standard class. You could think about how you do in Visual Basic or C#. You give a namespace name, you know, Silverlight Hello. We have a class name main page. This is the same thing. We're building an object. Okay, all this fun stuff here. XML and S sounds awful. XML namespace. This is like the using statement in C#, or like an include or something like that. It's basically saying, here's all the stuff in libraries we want to link in, or we want to have for context to know what like an object is for a text box. or one of the classes we've made. So if we start making multiple classes in a project and we have subclasses, if they're in a separate namespace, we better include these namespaces and then we prefix them with a name. Default gives us our components. So if we say text box and there's no little prefix thingy in front of it, it's in our default namespace. So this is just the schema for saying here's the stuff we can build. And realize this is stuff we build. We build it, it's hopefully an intelligent object, and if it's connected the right way, it does stuff. So we're doing Tinker Toys, active Tinker Toys that blink and flip around, more like an erector set maybe with the motors and stuff. You know, you set it all up and say go. We're doing this now. And if we can build it without code behind, life is good. There's still going to be code behind. Okay. One of the cool things here is this D, and this is expression blend. A lot of times we want to design things, and by default, a lot of things will auto-size, and when you look on the screen, you'll see nothing. So a nice thing that happens, we can have design things that are completely ignored when we're running it in the application. So those things are just so when we see them on the screen, we see things of a certain size as opposed to nothing. They'll scrunch down to nothing. And that was one of the early problems with SAML. And so notice here, we're doing namespace definitions. We say, here's my class name we're going to build. And it's going to have a design height of 300 units. Remember, we're not using pixels quite anymore. And then the 400 width, just for design purposes. And it's going to be whatever size the browser is. You know, in actual real life, it's going to take the browser size unless we define it some other place. So if we just say height width, we're going to force the size of this piece to stick in the browser and probably go top left corner. Okay, now we have something a little interesting. Okay, we have the marker for our user control, but in between here we have a stack panel. It's one of our containers. Stack panels are wonderful. You can make them stacked horizontally or vertically. By default, they're going to just go up and down vertically unless we reset the orientation to horizontal, and then all of a sudden they'll start stacking this away. Okay, we're going to give this a name, layout root, and that's pretty much a convention for all the wizards that are happening for Microsoft for a lot of the web stuff. So you can almost just think layout root is the top level thing in Silverlight most of the time you'll see in terms of a name piece. And then inside the stack panel, and this is one that's just going to go top to bottom, we're going to have a text block. It's kind of like, you know, a text box, but it's not meant to be for editing most of the time. We can optionally give it a name. So this X means we're using another set of schema, but this X name always works. Sometimes name works, sometimes it doesn't, but this X colon name, that namespace almost always works when you want to name something. So if you got an object you want to name it, cool. Use the X colon, ignore what the books say. But most of the time you don't need these names. Unless you want to program it, code it, tweak it, you know, imperatively go sit there and do stuff with it. Well, I want to build it, destroy it, whatever. I need a hook. So if I've got my code behind, this is the XAML part. The C# part gets a partial class. If I want to tweak this thing by code, I've got to name it. If I don't have to tweak it by code, don't name it. Why? It's just an extra piece of clutter. Okay, so we really don't need a name, but cool, we can do this. But I do have code behind, so I lied. Okay, right now the way I'm doing this, we will actually have to have this thing named because I'm going to have a method. And notice I've got a button called myButton. And we got a method called myButtonClick that responds to a click event. So you'll notice when we declaratively do things, we can also have them wire up to events. That's where we start getting richness, and we can wire these up in much more sophisticated ways. We can wire them up with data contexts. We can have multi-way bindings where controls interactively bind together. But we just have a text block and a button, one on top of the other. That's our code. Wow. And when we're done, it's going to look, yeah, I didn't get there. When it's done, it's going to look something like this. Okay? It's going to say, hello, press me. Okay, I've noticed my styling here is lousy. We did stack panel, I didn't specify the width. What did it do? Took the whole width of the screen, and if I got a really wide screen, it's going to keep doing it. So we could define where things are at. Stacking containers give you all this richness of putting things in the right place and size and things. Okay, but that's about it. Going back though, here's the code equivalent to what's happening. And so my main page had a XAML part that builds the object, and by default, you always have an initialized component. So whatever your component name is, initialized component is the part that hydrates it and builds it up and sets it all up and wires up all the events by default. magically for you. And you'll also notice the main page inherits from user control. Well, that's where you're starting to get it. Through the inheritance hierarchy, you've got all this stuff here that gets you all this nice richness in wiring up, and you can spend some time on learning this. There's really elements and there's controls, but it turns out there's a very good richness in this where you could actually have buttons with a grid kind of layout inside it, and you have multiple text boxes and buttons. You can all put this in a button control if you want to. You can do some very strange things because things are meant to be stackable and assemblable, including layouts and pieces. But right now, as we got my button click, and it's standard thing. The builders now are nice. If you just double click on it, it goes builds your my button click, and then all we're doing is we're saying my message. Remember, that was my control, lousy name, for that text block. And it has a text property, and this is a lousy way to do it, but it was nice and easy and boneheaded so you can see this. All I'm doing is assembling some text. I'm having an instance variable. Wow. I've got an instance variable, so every time I click on this, it's going to count up. Pretty cool, huh? But it's telling us some things. Right now, we've got a partial class. We have a C# part. We have a SAML part. Just realize the SAML part just builds stuff, and we're trying to build it with all this connection, so when it starts, it's ready to go. And parameterized constructors sometimes cause problems. Let's change gears now, and why don't we go in? I got two choices. I can take the CAN program, and I want to go fairly quick, or I can build one up by itself. I mean, this won't take very long. Should I just do the canned one? Your choice. I'll have to build one piece of code here at the end. Remember, I wanted a discussion. This has been a lecture. Is it canned? Or is it... Pardon? Okay. Only one person spoke up. Okay, this is going to be the same code. I want to run this really fast so you can see it. Remember, this is running in a web host. Now there's 3 different web hosts, and I don't have this indicated in the lecture slides. Or sorry, this is not a lecture. Boring, sorry. Wow, this says hello and press me. Okay, and if we do press me, it's going to just, you press the button 1 time, 2 times. Cool, huh? That's it. Okay, but it works. It has an instance variable. Good place to get started now. More importantly than this app, because this app is pretty lame, is we want to understand what's going on. Because right now is you start with the simple ones and everyone goes, cool, this is easy. And when you start getting more complicated, if you're not understanding what's going on, you're going to get lost. So the concepts here are going to be more important. So this whole app is entirely client-side except for stuff to get it going. And I want to look at some of the pieces and parts here. And once we know this, we can do a little bit more on some of the other parts. Okay, if you look at the structure here, and I hope you can see this reasonably well, off on the right side, I'm going to have to get my face in front of the screen here. We have 2 projects here. When we built it, remember we did the 2 parts when I was showing you on the screen? We built it where there's a SL hello. That's your Silverlight project. And you're also building the web project. Now right now there's no ASP.NET stuff going on, and there's 2 things here. There's a test page ASPX and test page HTML. You could call this like default.html or like the standard defaults.aspx. You know, that's an appropriate thing to do, so when you get to the right address, it just goes. These are redundant. Pick one, delete the other one, and make it your startup. Always right-click on one of these and make it your default startup project. Okay, so what's happening is when we start, we're going to load up one of these 2 things, and I'm going to show you one of these real quick. Silverlight is just big JavaScript junk, and it's that interface between the Silverlight piece and our host page. So we have a host page. Both of these contain our ZAP file and the Silverlight runtime that's going to get to the ZAP file, and we have to connect this up. So this is our web host, stays on the server. This is going to be our Silverlight, and is deployed on the client and run from the client. So I want to look first at our, just look at the HTML code here real quick. Okay, if we look at this standard HTML page, you know, some standard junk, and basically the body, this is a full screen page. This is kind of out of the way. We start getting down here and we start seeing some JavaScript. So as I start scrolling through in the JavaScript, what we have here is we have an on Silverlight. You notice it's never capitalized on the start, but we have an on Silverlight error method. We can actually call this. So when things really have a problem, Silverlight says, "Eep," we're calling this method and we can display things. When Silverlight really barsts and dies. And so this is general JavaScript processing. Okay, so this is a place where we could do some host logging. We could do all sorts of things. We're getting to this on our server. Okay. Usually you want to set a focus here so you can make another on focus thing. There's two focuses in Silverlight. You want to focus on the web page. You have to focus into Silverlight from the web page. And then in Silverlight, traditionally, you want to focus on a control. And if you don't do the two steps in the very beginning, you can't just open a Silverlight page and have it run. You're going to open the Silverlight page and nothing will happen until you click down in there somewhere. So it's going to be kind of a frustrating experience. Often there's a little trick in here where you add one more JavaScript piece that calls a method on your Silverlight to set the focus. And then you can go automatically into Silverlight, set the focus on one of your controls, and then load the page and start typing, you know, on your first control you care about. Okay, down below now, but we have one method so far. We have basically a body, and notice the body is our Silverlight control. You can name this, and if you want to do programmatic stuff back and forth, you're going to name your Silverlight control. And this is just standard stuff, but now we're wiring up our on error. So there's an on error Silverlight piece that's going to be wired into this on Silverlight error we had up above, JavaScript. So this is one of the places to communicate back and forth by the JavaScript approach. You can set some general parameters on here. Auto upgrade means Silverlight updates. You get the latest version of Silverlight. And then it starts loading things. Down below in here, we're going to start with client bin, SL hello. I've got this package zap file. Okay, so remember I told you about that structure here. This is just downloading the system. Okay, everything else in here isn't terribly important. Configurations become incredibly important, but not right now. Okay, we see a client bin directory. Why don't we look at this real quick? Client bin is the deployable stuff. It's the stuff that goes, as soon as you load the page, it goes from the server down to your client, or it's cached in your client if you've been there before. And it's this zap file. Okay, if we go look in the zap file, I'm sorry it's a little on the small side. We can go look at this archive and see what we've got in here. Okay, inside we have our DLL and we have a manifest. That's not terribly exciting, but everything we need for the runtime context, well, everything we're doing right now is a DLL. This is what we're deploying. Once the Silverlight piece on the client sees this, it just goes and starts to run it. And remember, before we head on the host page, it knows where to go. It's going into the zap file and it's looking for that specific starter class. Okay, so we've really hit the server side and kind of beat it to death, but this is much easier if you look at one of the big projects. Okay, so now going back out of this, why don't we look in here? The place you're going to start is you're going to start in the app. And if you see this, there's a XAML. Even the app has XAML for it. And you're not going to see anything except this. And all it's doing, this is where we're starting. We start with this application. This is our SL Hello app. And gee, that's not terribly exciting. We also have a code behind. And the code behind is going to be where a little bit more is happening. Okay, normal using statements. Down below here we have a constructor that wires up an exit message, a startup message, unhandled exception, and some of those things are going to go back out to our host environment if we need to. And we have this initialize component. And on app startup, we're going to set up a root visual. The root visual is the thing you want to display. So the app is just your launcher. What does it launch? It launches that root visual, and so we're going to have to send that one of those visual XAML-y kind of things, that user control, and it's our main page control. Okay, and so then we handle some of the events if we care about it, so we can attach on exit to do fun, nifty stuff. But now the real exciting part is we've launched it, we're going into main page. Again, two parts. There's a XAML part for what's defining the object. And notice we can see this on the designer as we're doing it. And if without this design width and height, until you put stuff in, this would be sized to nothing. Or you'd have to spec it to a size, and then you wouldn't get an automatic resize. Code here isn't terribly exciting. It's the same stuff you saw before, right? So I didn't lie. We maybe added some nifty things, like I set up my horizontal alignment to center. And these are just setting properties. There's a couple ways to set things. Often you can containment have objects and objects and objects, but if you have a property attached to like a text block, you can just set them directly. Okay, so this is just like saying I got my class, set my property of name to my message. We could do this in code, but now we're doing this declaratively. You know, like here's the rules, XAML parser, go figure out what you want to do, go make my object. That's like SQL, right? Here's what I want, just go do it. Don't tell me the steps, just go do it. Okay, so we're setting this up, and we set up our button. Okay, not terribly exciting. Notice what we have in code behind. Not much. What we do is, by default, if we would have done this, I set up my button count, and I put in a region just because I put in a region. Okay, whoop. We got a constructor. This was really done for me with the partial class. It does the initialize component. This is done with the wizard, and this is always done. You always initialize a component to get it up and running, hydrate it, you know, attach it to where it's going to go. And then for methods, I've got my click method, right? And I had to name my message because I'm actually calling it something, and we're just tweaking that button count, and I'm using that to display it. That's the app, okay? And if we were to really have a problem, like if we had this click button and we had a divide by zero error, okay, what would happen? Unhandled exception would percolate its way up and through the system back to the web browser. So we have a whole system wired up here. And this is about it. But notice we have the two projects on the two sides. References on the top side. The reference for my Silverlight hello are going to be Silverlight references with the Silverlight runtime. You can't share DLLs between Net and Silverlight. There are different DLLs and different object structures. So you recompile them. They often look the same. And you can do often similar classes, you know, like list classes. You can do a list class in ASP.NET down in your web project if you want to, or you can do it in Silverlight. But there are two sets of classes. One's in the Silverlight runtime for the client. Well, we pretty well beat that one to death now, but it's important to understand now our two sides and what's happening. So back to where we were from current slide. This gets faster, I hope. Okay, so you saw that kind of stuff. You saw how it worked. And we go, wow. So our structure here. We have our web page. We had that on Silverlight error. Remember that? That piece of code we did. This is JavaScript. So we can put all sorts of JavaScript methods for anything we want to respond to events and things, or we can have things for communication. It is also possible on our app to set up methods that JavaScript methods can call. And if you remember when we built our Silverlight object, what we do is we bind that. All those properties in Silverlight said, oh, the on error is bound to this on Silverlight error. If you have an exception, there's exception handling that'll happen in the more mature hosts, and that happens directly, but you're going to throw this exception, and then what happens? Well, we sometimes want to host handle it, and we want to client handle it. Okay, the Silverlight 4 runtime has things like application startup, application exit events, right? It's the one that knows it when it's loading stuff. And part of that's through the container hierarchy. And inside here, we're going to have communication. We had a main page, and inside there, we had a stack panel. Think this containment. You build objects inside objects and how they interact and how they lay out. The other thing is they're going to communicate. So a lot of times what's going to happen is there's what's called a containment hierarchy. How you stuck things together, and there's also a visual hierarchy of how things work, and it turns out messages tend to percolate. If you press a button message, it starts at the bottom and it will actually move its way out to the top, and you can actually intercept that message at different places. Now if you grab that event and you stop it, well, it's going to stop completely. Okay, a real quick stop. Does this seem like it's a decent level, or am I going too slow? Okay. Just a little mental break. That's all I care. For you, it's too easy. I know, Keith. Yeah. Okay. For timing here, I may end up having to stop a little bit early, but I'd rather not go too fast. And again, This is important because this perspective, if you start doing Silverlight apps with this understanding, you can start writing things very fast, very quickly, because you see the details and you know how to put it together. I spent more time trying to figure the environment out than I did trying to figure out the stupid app. So this isn't terribly tough, right? But again, if you've got a good mental model now, you're not programming blind. Okay, so this containment model, we're seeing components and components and components. That's a good thing, right? Inheritance and inheritance and inheritance is the way to die. We've learned that you want to build composite things out of little things, right? A car is an inheritance. You build a car with wheels that work the right way with transmissions, and there's a lot of connections, couplings, and events and things and wiring that work. But it turns out that the mature design patterns we're doing now are interacting components. And if we can do this with XAML, we can just bind this. We can have a designer like Matt here. Basically, we give him a surface of a view model with all the things you can do, and then he can go play around and make a huge interacting, tinker toy set that does this beautiful stuff without having to do a lick of code. We're doing bindings or we're doing some work in Blend, and that's it. That's where we try and get to, except that's still something we're still trying to figure out how to do well and easily. It's a little tougher than it should be, but the power's there. Okay, XAML is real important. It's just XML. It's got a bunch of namespaces that are used to give you the scheme and what's right. And there's a lot of IntelliSense right now to help you. It's declarative, object hierarchy, there's a visual hierarchy, and it turns out that whole hierarchy determines how events are going to percolate and how commands are going to be routed and things. And that's very important. The other thing that's going to happen is a lot of times these objects have a data context. And the default data context will be the code behind, but we can switch it. That's a powerful thing. So we can connect events to methods, and we can have commanding and things. It's really a powerful environment, and it turns out we can build things much more robustly than just hacking together, let's say, HTML code without some sort of superstructure. Okay. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something real fast and easy. I'm going to do something with layout. Okay, and one of the ones that's kind of interesting is a Silverlight grid. Okay, it's going to look like this. In fact, I'll do the demo first, so you can see it. I'm going to go a lot faster now, honest. Except I'm slow at clicking here. Before we do anything, we're going to run it. Two sides, we know what the two sides are, and all I'm going to do is, this is all XAML. There is no code, none at all. Wow, those are buttons. And so you knew which button was which. I colored them, and just in case you're colorblind, I told you the color. It's a red color button, okay? This is a good way to get started. If you're playing with layouts, you want something that's fully sized. You want it to auto-size to the full width that you have. And so what we really have is we have that user control we had before, and contained inside, we're going to have a grid control. A grid is not a data grid. A grid is a layout. There's a data grid and there's a grid. Grid's the layout thing. And grids have rows and has columns. This one actually has 3 rows. Row 0, 1, 2. Top left corner is our 0, 0 origin. Okay, so we count across, count down. And I made a 2-pixel row and a 2-pixel column, or sorry, a 2 pseudo-pixel width and height here, and use that for a grid splitter. You'll often see in books where they put grid splitters in the edge of one of these big rows and things. That's lame, it never works. Just go ahead and make a small thing and put your grid splitter in there. A grid splitter is a nice control. It's one that allows you to grab and yank. It turns out the size here is set up, and I want to talk about just kind of layout and grids really fast because it's going to be something you're going to want to do a bunch of. Stack panels, if you shove something in, it just goes, left to right or up down. A grid, if you throw 3 things in a grid without doing something about it, everything goes on top of each other, which usually isn't what you want. Okay, so what we have here is you can go and you can get a grid splitter, and once I grab it, wow. And by the way, we could do something with these buttons, and we could do something with pressing it. If we resize things here, you'll notice that things automatically resize and scale. So there's a proportionality in here. that we set up on this grid. You can set it up so it's fixed size or proportional, and we can play around with the grid splitters for interactive use. That's often a wonderful paradigm. Okay, stack panels and grids can get you by with murder. Okay, if you use those two controls to start out, you can do a huge amount of your work. There's another one, I think Silverlight finally has a border control, the standard things with, you know, top, right, bottom, and then middle. Another one, but it's best to take simple containers and just stack them. So inside here, we could have a stack panel, or a set of stack panels, you know, left, right, top, down, whatever. We can make lists with these types of things. You can put scroll bars in type. There's a scroller container that you can use in here, so you can scroll. Once you scroll and virtualize what's inside, often the resizing gets a little strange. Okay, so realize whenever you're doing something with scrolling or something that virtualizes and changes the size, then all of a sudden this automatic sizing becomes a little more problematic, and you'll find out that there's some strange things. Make something simple with buttons and play around with it. Okay, very fast for code. There's nothing real exciting we want to see because the model's the same thing. But inside our main page, just in the XAML, you'll see the code behind's nothing. And if we expand up this, design view tended to help because we had sizes here. What we did was, grid is called layout root. Remember I told you that habit. And we have this grid, which is that layout grid, and we have column definitions and we have row definitions. Okay, and you see some have stars, some don't. I want to talk about that in a little bit later. But what we do is we're going to place stuff inside a grid. This is going to go fairly fast because I don't want to waste time on this too much. You can look at the code later. The buttons were put into grid row 00 or into 02, or remember we have that one in the middle for the grid splitter, the skinny things. So we're going 0 and 2 and 2 and 0. So we're putting the 4 buttons in the 4 corners with our grid splitter. Okay, enough of that, but to make sense out of it now, what I'd rather do is go back to the slides. Yep. And okay, so that's what we saw. And if you notice, this is like a 2-to-1 and a 3-to-1 ratio, pretty much. And it turns out the thing in the middle is 2, which just changes the ratio, but tough. Okay, what we did was we have a layout, origin 00, so we have multiple columns. If I want 3 columns, I have a column definition, and the 20 star means a relative. It takes all the star stuff, and it just says, that's going to be my total. So what we're going to first do in a layout pass is we're going to say, how big is that? It needs its 2 pseudo pixels of space. And then it says, how wide am I? This is when it's doing a layout pass. It says, well, this is a 20 and that's a 10. So I'm going to take that remainder, and 2/3 is going to go here and 1/3 is going to go there. So if I change the 20 star and 10 star to a 2 and a 1, or if I wanted to do it to 1 and 1/2, it would look the same. 100 might be a nice total ratio number or something, but you just do whatever's convenient. If you ever do it absolute, then that's a different matter. Okay, so the thing is, be careful. These are absolute numbers. And so notice here, this is a 3-to-1, so this is going to be 3 out of 4 parts. The total's 40, and this is our relative. And as soon as you move that grid splitter, you broke this. Okay, it's going to have different ratios, but you notice it preserved ratios when I resize it. Remember, I moved it around and it still preserved the ratio. So what's happening is this still is relative, but it's changing the relative numbers here. Okay, if you understand a grid, you could do a lot of things. The stack panel is probably obvious. Vertical orientation, horizontal. Think about this. You could probably do most of your interfaces with those just by stacking one and another and another and another. If you ever do these grid splitters, do not have like 2 or 3 grid splitters and lots of rows and columns. Stack them, you know, and stack panels and everything else. You're going to be much better off. Okay, so that's just kind of getting you an idea of layout so you can be dangerous. And understanding layout is something you have to play with, but do it with simple controls and things, and do it by itself before you start doing it in code. Because if you're fighting layout in code, you get lost. Okay, the other thing that happened here that I want to go back to, though, is we use something called an attached property. This is powerful. What happened was, and this is the part that I want you to think about. This is a subtlety here. We set a grid.row in our button. Okay, imagine this. If we have a button, One way we could do this is the button could know about grids and stack panels and every other control we might come up with, including our own custom controls. That wouldn't be good. That would be this monster, everything's connected to everything else. Buttons don't know anything about grids. Okay, what's happening is you're doing something called an attached property. Grid.row is not on the button. You're setting this property on the button, and then it goes up and finds some place around there by reflection saying, well, who's got a row that's a grid? Because you might have 2 or 3. It'll find the first grid that's there and said, oh, you've got a row? Do you have a row 2 and a column 4? Cool, I'm going there. So it's actively searching, and this is by the idea of an attached property. So a property on one control can be actually accessed in another control, which gives us this idea of containment. This ain't the way you programmed before. Okay, so this is an important part on Mendel models. This is why declarative. The model of the code declaratively, you can dynamically read the XAML. This is hydrated by grabbing it, looking at the XAML. Our view kind of things do this with the XAML. Is it okay if I go for about another 20 minutes? And I think we want to stop. I may not get the RIA, but that would be a good thing to lead from where we left. Okay, so I'm going to stop in 20 minutes. I'm going to keep pretty close watch. Okay, so attached properties are important. And you notice, just go back to the code. I don't want to go back and show you, but you will see in the buttons that they had where they're attached. There was also things called row span and column span. It just said, oh, I want to go across all 3, down all 3. The buttons, though, were just row, column, and they just fit. You find things in the visual tree. There's a hierarchy, and there's ways to inspect this. And those tools are really important when you start playing around with this. So buttons are agnostic for the container. They don't know about containers, but they know they go into this hierarchy. But you can declaratively say, well, I got a button. It's inside this container. I know this. I can declaratively attach this to that container property of which it was in. So the button's getting an attached property. And it's connecting up the right way. That's a cool tinker toy. Because imagine if you did this with code the hard way. It would be a design nightmare. Okay. This is a fundamental Silverlight and WPF principle. So the Microsoft of old that used to do the dumb things that just were easy to do one thing and you did it one way and you had no way to change it. This is a toolkit that has huge richness. Okay. Now I want to change and I want to go to a navigation app. So we played around with, you notice I didn't do much for controls, but I wanted to show you the basics. If you want to do something real, it'd be nice to have this idea of navigation app. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a window, which is called a frame. Okay, a frame's kind of this container window, and it's held in an address. So the thing is, Silverlight does a thing, and that content thing, the main frame, has this frame inside that's going to be a navigation frame. And inside it, we're going to view inject. We're going to stick page after page after page. We're going to have buttons outside this thing that allow us, when we click on it, say, oh, I want to load this thing or this thing. And it looks like navigation, but it's not. So the buttons say, load this thing in, and actually what you're going to do is you're going to build it. So if you click the About Box button, it says, build me an About Box page, and shove it into that frame. And if I go back to home, build me the home frame page, and stick it into the frame. Interesting thing is, that's going to give us some power. Isolation. One page doesn't have to know about the other, and the container doesn't have to know about anything except where to go. So it means we can have a container that can be built up dynamically. I would assert from that idea of this reflection is you could start throwing things on the fly and have it dynamically discovered and have all sorts of richness that just magically builds up. It's one of the powers. I'm just giving you a tease, but it's where the power is. But with that, then it means now how do we connect it together in the right ways? Okay, a navigation app is one of the patterns. Prism is the other one, and both of these are view injection. They look like navigation, but they're view injection, and they have a whole history, so they act like navigation. So when you go page to page and you can go back, it's got a whole history in there. The navigation control has some ways to be able to remember where it was and which pages it actually looked at, and act just like ASP.NET and HTML stuff, but it's not. Okay, so it's going to look like this. The default thing has a branded area, and it's got a couple of areas. So I want us to think about it first, and then we'll see how this is built up. And this is about where I want to stop, except I'm going to show you some cool code at the very end. So I want to see if I can get to that cool code. Okay, what's going to happen is page goes in here. This is a page. I've got a page that has home page content. As you may guess, it's probably a stack panel or something like that. So you just have one and the next. Wow. Okay, there's some styles in here that we're getting, but This is a page. When we click to the About, these are called hyperlink buttons. So I got a home hyperlink button and an About hyperlink button. So when we click on those tell the navigation thingy, say, I want you to load this piece in. And then there's ways to make this convenient. There's a lot of power in how they set up this environment. Up here, icon or just a path or an icon, and a name here so you can just brand it. And if you don't want that, whoop. But this has nothing to do with the navigation system. Up here is just a stack panel. It's a horizontal stack panel. So there's a border in here that holds a stack panel that holds buttons. That's all it is, just a bunch of containers to get in the right place. You have a bunch of hyperlink buttons, and they look pretty. Each of those buttons is going to talk to the navigation piece, so we can load stuff in here. So every time you click, it looks like we're navigating. And on top of that is, you'll see that the page will be displayed. You know, it's doing all those things that you would think. It's using the pound sign instead of a real navigation, but the thing is, it's got the whole history, everything else you would expect. So on this, we do a new project, we do Silverlight navigation application, and does a single page pattern. I can make this so stinking fast because there's nothing much in here right now. So with this wimpy thing is, I'm just going to do one fast just for the fun of it, and I'm not going to save it. So if we're in Visual Studio, go File, New Project. See, I can do work here. You'll notice how wussy this is. And the one here is Silverlight Navigation Application. There's a business one that's cool, but it's got some stuff that it can hurt you. You want to be careful with it. And that's the business one below. And we're just going to call it something lame, like XX. I have no idea where this is, and I don't care. Okay, normal host thing, they're saying, well, what's your corresponding web pair with it? If you want to do something. And you go, wow. And then out of the box, we're going to see that same kind of screen. I got a slow computer, I'm sorry. Okay, remember, it's downloading the it's compiling, downloading the XApp and everything else. Okay, so what's happening is, we have a main page control that got downloaded by Silverlight, and inside here there's a bunch of border controls and layout and crap. And inside you then have up above, Home and About are hyperlink buttons. And inside here we have a page that just says home page content, and if we click on About, we go About page. That's a whole new page. We made a new page, got rid of the old one, and reinstantiated a new page, hydrated just from its XAML, and away we go. Okay, so that's a navigation application. If we were to look into it, into the code, there's a couple things of interest, and I think I'm just going to go in hardcore right away. I don't want to spend too much time. We could talk, if you ever care, we could talk about it, but you can see the design surface and down below the XAML. Let's focus on the XAML real quick. First part, and there'll be a little summary here a little later, is we have the control, and the control is my XX, project name is my namespace main, it's called main page, and that's often a convention. And inside here we have a grid, doing the same grid stuff we saw before, and it's called layout root, very common for this kind of application, and that's going to be kind of important. But a border holds one thing, and you can use it for, you know, making a nice pretty bevel border or whatever. It's an annotation that contains one thing. So often if you use a border, you want to put two things in something, you better use a stack panel or grid or something else inside it. Okay, but now we have this important thing, navigation frame. Here's our container thing that's going to be our view injectable piece. So it's our container that does stuff. And inside here, it says its name is content frame. And there's this thing called a URI mapper. This is a cool piece. You can do almost anything you want to. This is not URIs, but this is that pseudo URI. So when we go in here, we're going to have these URI mappings. And we're declaratively defining these things. And we said, well, if we have something with a URI of nothing, right, is our base address plus nothing, we're going to assume that to be home. We're going to go load our home page in views. Okay. If we have a different page name, we're going to map into the views page name.xaml. Wow. What it's doing is it's now declaratively going and saying, okay, here's all those pages I've got in my system, and it knows where they're at. It will literally go and beef those up. Do we have to stop for a minute? So where we were at was we're talking about these mappings. You can make these rules as much as you want, but you start from specific and you go to general. And it turns out this mapped URI, you can also have a different DLL. So imagine is you can have different things that are very specific for pages, and if you put them into an isolated set of DLLs with their own dependency, you can actually map them to its DLL into, let's say, its view. This is really its views subdirectory. It's a location where it is in the ZAP file. So if we search in the ZAP file, it's in the views path and it finds that XAML file when it goes to navigate and says, here it is, hydrate it, go build it up. Because remember, XAML builds objects. Stick it in the right spot, because that's what we're doing with our XAML, and away we go. Okay, so when we go from page to page, we create a page, the old page gets destroyed. So there's going to be a page loading event, there's going to be a page, exit event, there's going to be navigation stuff. All these events are happening, but they all happen as a matter of course in this view injection system. Okay, so then down below we've got a couple more things. We have this navigation grid. So up above we had our piece, and notice here we've got some stuff and we're going, what in the heck is this? Oh, that's the stuff in my top left corner. That's all it is, right? Looks hooky, top left corner. We go down below. We have a links border, top right corner. There's a border in there that holds one thing, which means you're going to have something else in there, stack panel. And it's going to be horizontal. So you notice here, somewhere down the line, it's got a style. And the style, if you looked at it, would have a orientation, so it sets a whole bunch of properties so we don't have to. Cool. Okay, and inside here we have 3 buttons that are hyperlink buttons. And the way that the button's made is you can have a name, and right now we're not calling this programmatically, so that name's lame. Throw it away. Okay, divider 1. We want to name a divider? Yeah, okay, that could also go away. But what's happening here, the style means how it looks. We could actually use standard styles, and there's a bunch of them out on the internet that you could download. Like there's a Windows 7 style, there's an Expression Dark style, and you could really rebrand this just by sticking a different style on there and attaching it in terms of a resource. Okay, navigate URI. What we do is that navigation set of controls up above, there's a navigation piece that has these little navigation rules, and you give it a URI, and it basically parses and says, okay, I'm going to search through that list. That's why you want to go specific to general. You set up the rules, and you say, there's about, and it searches about and says, what do I do? Well, I'm going to load an about.xaml from views. I'm going to look for it there, and if it's there, I'm going to go build it. If not, it's going to give me an error. Target name, where am I putting it? I could have multiple frames. Most of the time, it makes sense to have one frame, but I could have multiple frames doing different things, so I could load, a view in one place and have like some sort of more consistent piece with a different lifetime over. Imagine like a history navigation piece, something, and then have the content that's going to be displayed in a different view. So if you want to view inject multiple things at multiple times, navigation view injects one thing. So it's just a container window. So what we're doing is we're saying, here's the frame. And when we build a page, it turns out that page navigation gets set up into the view. So it turns out the frame holds this navigation piece, and it's going to share it with every view when it builds it. So it builds it and shoves it in. And that's done through the inheritance. And so what's going to happen is everything is sharing. So inside a page, you could actually navigate back. You could have a back button. And what do? You call the view injected navigation piece you have a reference to, and you can play with it. Or you call the hyperlink button, which is outside of your navigation system. They're always there. You just click on it. Okay, so this says where I'm going. It goes through those rules and figures out what page to load and set up. It tells you what frame, if you want multiple frames, to go to. And then this is just what to display in the button. And then here's my style. That's it. Okay, but notice that we're going to have kind of a problem in this. Okay, and the pages are nothing special. I want to show you one real fast. Remember how lame that looked? What's in here? About page content. Remember, we just load in this big area and that's it. Okay, done. So, Oh, sorry. Yeah, I went through a bunch of these things. Okay, so what I already talked about, there's a frame thing, right? It's a page container, holds all the stuff. It actually does hold a history. So you can actually use browser forward, backwards buttons automatically in here. And it turns out if you want to have like the context, like if you want to have, I'm going to this page and I have all this extra metadata that I want to use and I want to grab it, standard HTML stuff when you're going from page to page, you want to share like a username when you go to the next page, you can do that kind of thing. It's probably not smart because there's better mechanisms. Okay, a page is the stuff you stick in, and there's that hyperlink button that allows you to go back and forth. URI mapper is a cool one. There's a lot of details here. I talked about enough of them. You can go look at that later. Hyperlink navigation is hyperlink buttons talk to the navigation piece in that frame, right? The frame holds, this is always containment. Okay, so the way this kind of looks is, what you just saw was we had that links border, and inside there there's a stack panel and a bunch of hyperlink buttons, top right corner. Down below, I'm getting better. We have a branding border, right? That was the one with the icon and the program name. Hint, web pages don't always update when you expect and change when you expect. Always put a version number someplace in an obvious place, because it turns out things won't always version the way you expect, or sometimes the HTML will version and the Silverlight will not version, or it'll mix and match. So you will have yourself a whole lot of hurt if you don't keep, every time you do a new version of a compile, update your number, because you might be debugging the wrong version. I had to learn that the hard way. Okay, the content border has this navigation frame called the content frame, and that was just the default name. We can name it anything, and we insert pages. So remember, we insert pages, always creating them. Now think about the problem. Yep, I led one too many slides. Okay, so the hyperlink button. Hyperlink button says change to navigate. So when you press the button, it knows, well, this is about. So it sends a navigate URI to the content frame. It knows about a content frame, and it talks to URI mapper. So it's trying to be opaque here, because remember, this is outside the system. Inside the system, we're going to search your XAML in locations and say, hey, do I have XAML of the right form in the right place? And if it's a different DLL, it says, we'll find it in that right DLL. We can get that spec, create the page, add it to the frame, and away it goes. So you notice this is very decoupled, very independent. So I don't care about that stuff right now, but it's very good in terms of loose coupling. I've said most of this. Here's what I was going to say. Oops, we have ourselves one big problem. We decouple so well. How in heck are we going to share stuff from page to page to page if it's so stinking decoupled? Okay, well, we could have cookies. Okay, but now we got to have the server sending the cookies and the cookie interpreter. Okay, and Silverlight doesn't like that so well. We can work with it, but it's going to be difficult. We can share stuff with different contexts. We can put in a database, right? We can store our variables in database if we go. Lame. So what we want is we want a way to share information between pages. We're building these dynamically. We can build a page and keep it around. Default is you build a page and as soon as you navigate away, it's gone. But you can keep it on. But now think about this. You only have so much browser memory allocated. And if you're outside the browser cache and you're caching everything, you're going to have a very poor experience and things are going to freeze. So it is best to usually have pages just dispose. And if you're going to have a context, you better share the context by a different means. So we have to find a sharing mechanism. We have the isolation, but we want a controlled share. And that's our next job. So we're going to create a simple shared context. And this is teasing to the idea of a view model. View model, model, whatever. And this is dependency injection idea. We want a universal way to get stuff and to change stuff and to share stuff. And one of the ways to do this then is in our application, we're going to, I'll do a little better. An application, in this case, I want to create kind of a little mini dependency injection shared mediator thing. Okay, often you want to have a single place to go to so you don't have dependencies on everything. And I'm going to call this context manager. What does it do? It holds a context. So if you have 5 or 6 things like a view model you have to share, or a model or a database connection, we're going to put those things in our context manager. So we're going to know about one thing. Now it'd be better to have interfaces or a pub sub, so you could have like a universal interface. You can stick anything you want to in there. But right now, as I'm trying to make this simple, so we're just going to have a place to put a view model, and we're going to have a place to take out the view model. And it turns out view models usually have to notify, so I'm going to have a base class. I'm going to take advantage of that, so I'm just going to store the base class to say everything's going to have this base class for a view model, and I'm going to go Maverick on this. Okay, so I'm talking about some ideas, and I want you to see this, but a view model is just going to be a place to hold state, and it's usually going to hold a model with like the database connections and all the real stuff, but a view model is all the stuff that I want to bind to in Blend. So in other words, if I want to see the width and height of a box and have it set, I ought to have that in my view model. If I want to have a database connection that I have to bind to, or a data source, I need to have that accessible or available from my view model. So we want to share this, and if we share view models, each page can then say, here's my view model, get the stuff I need, and it's a place to share data in a controlled way. So I'm doing this with some cheats, but trying to simply show you how to do this. So each view then takes that purple view model you see here that's built in the application, stuck in the context manager, and then when we create it, we're going to automatically put it in construction. And if it's a singleton, that means that on constructors we can have a parameterless construction. There's other ways to do this, right? Dependency injection, MEF, whatever. We're just going to create the object and stuff in the view model immediately so we have our context. And if it is built by the application, as long as the application lives, we have our equivalent of a session state. Okay? I want you to think this is just the ideas and the tools and the very basic idea of how to do this. Advantages. This is hugely powerful if you put it together right. And a key idea of a view model is you have to support iNotify property change. If you change something in the view model, somebody has to know, because you don't want to keep going, what do I got? What do I got? What do I got? I want it to tell me only when it changes so I can respond and update my view. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I'm going to kind of do, and then I'm going to demonstrate this really fast, and we're going to quit at this stage. So this is going to take just a few minutes. I'm going to make 2 more pages, call first page, second page. If you go into Silverlight, you can make a project. You can make a project in the solution, and you make a new, and there's a Silverlight page project. That's one of those things intended to go in this navigation frame. And you put it in this views subdirectory. That's all you have to do. And then you put whatever you want to in there. Okay, the other thing you have to do then is you have to update the navigation to use those views, right? So all we do is if they're in the right spot and we put a couple of hyperlink buttons in there, we're done. We also now want to have our context. So down in the bottom, those last 4 lines, set up a shared folder. I'm just using this to stick everything in one place. So if you look in this project, there's a shared folder where I stuck in the base view model, context manager. It's not the best place to put it, but so everything's right there. Context manager is going to be my singleton to hold everything. The base view model is going to be this general generic thing, and all it does is implement iNotify property change, and all it does is say, hey, you got a property of this name. And it turns out that's enough in the binding system to update its view. And then we're going to have 2 view models. I'm going to have a school view model that describes a school, a name of a school and the population of students. I'm going to have a country view model that describes countries like the United States, and then the national bird, because that's an important thing, right? Okay. A population is an int, has nothing to do with a bird, but they both have names, right? So a country and school have names, but my view model has none of that stuff. Can we put it together? Well, we can't in traditional programming, in traditional interfaces with a strongly typed system, but we can in this SAML and loosely typed system. Okay, so this is where I'm going to stop the presentation part. I'm going to show you a cute little app that's lame beyond belief, but I want to first show the app. I'll show you a couple highlights for about a minute or 2, and then we're going to call this good enough. I didn't get to the RIA services, but this is kind of the core learning to get to a RIA service, and it turns out we could do this very fast. This application I hacked together. This was an important concept, and from what I talked about with Keith, is this got hacked over at lunch for about a half an hour. This is really fast and easy, but the ideas here are very important. So this is my Navigation 2 project. No, I don't want to save anything here. You will notice on the right hand side I made a sharing folder. I made a folder, and inside the folder I stuck in a couple of different classes, and these are just typed in. Okay, the view model, which is a base, the base view model has this notify property changed, and that's, notice it implements the iNotify property change interface, and it has this property changed event that does this notification, this magic notification. So any view that has this as a data context, okay, views always have a data context that's normally the code behind, but if we set the data context, it'll take a notification from that context and just update any property with the right name. Okay, so, but that's it for methods. There aren't any properties for names or anything else. It just is this generic property thing. I have this country view with 2 properties. The country view has, again, it has a property, if you notice, string name, the name of the country, and then again, the official bird. Wow. Okay, what does that have to do with schools? Absolutely nothing, except school can have a name. And it has a student count, maybe. That's something that administrators would care about, and that's an int. They're both supporting the same view model. On the top, they have the base view model, so they can do property change. And you will notice when we change the thing, if the student count changes, not if it's the same, but if it changes, we want to notify it. So we're telling the views, like, I've changed. That event's all we need, and so we can bind to it. So up on the top, we've got 2 views that I added. And I have a first view. It has a bunch of rows and stuff, and this is really lame layout. But you will notice the important thing. Both of them have a binding to a name, and it's a 2-way binding. That means if I change the control, I change the data. And if the data changes, I'll update. There's 1 way, there's 2 ways, there's different bindings. And it also has the official bird binding. That's not going to work very well for a country, but the names are common for both classes, right? Okay, and if I go into the second view, I will just assert second view has the student population bound in the name, but has nothing to do with the country. So we can see shared name, and then we can see this idea of binding without any common class or anything else, except they're just, you know, they have the right names on it. Okay, so if I go and execute this, okay, now the main page went and built that shared context, and I stuck in one view model or the other, and I've got a little constructor that just says one or the other. I'll have to show you the code in just a minute, but I'm going to start by debugging this, or without debugging this. And you will see when we run this, one of my favorite tricks is the beginning pages when I'm playing with code do nothing, so I can at least get it loaded, and then I can attach a debugger. Is the first page has USA with a bird of an eagle that's bald. Okay, that's in my shared context, and it turns out because the mediator is singleton, go look at the code on this. It could be done more sophisticated. Now, both of them on construction get the mediator, so the second one now gets USA, of course, but there's no students, right? So it bound and tried to find numbers of students, and there was no number of students property, so it did nothing. It's like, yep, there's not there. Now let's change some code. All we have to do is if I go to, it's going to be main page or app. I don't remember. Because this is the thing that has the lifetime of the entire application, right? I build a main page and it's always there. So that or the app's a good place. And you will notice I made this thing, this is just a singleton pattern. Go look at it for fun. But singleton context manager instance always gets me the same object. Okay, it's one of the ways you can do this. And then it has an initialize method, and I'm initialize it with the method of country. And in this is kind of like doing a factory, but I'm cheating. I can change this from country to school. Notice we've got, I need my glasses. That was not good. And we're going to go run it with school. Okay, that's all I changed. And I'm hiding this all behind this context manager. So what happens, I got this initialize method in the context manager that either builds a school piece of property with those 2 values or a country property. And I've changed it to the school. So now if I go to first it knows that it's UIUC close by, right? But there is no bird associated with that class. Second one has UIUC. We shared context, right? And all it was associated with was the name. I have no interface. The base class doesn't have this method. It went and found the SAML hydrated and said, I can find a name. That's all we have to do. This is polymorphic beyond belief, and it's decoupling beyond belief, and we also have shared context. So what I want you to think about as a tease is, with this kind of idea, we can have very controlled shared context. Mediator, shared pieces. You don't want this many-to-many. You always want to go to central pieces, and you want to avoid this huge coupling. This allows you some ways for designs with huge advantages of coupling, and you can build the advanced types of methodologies. How we do this would be a whole bunch of other discussions. Okay, we beat on this. Thank you for your time.